My name is Lei Guan. I'm the Sole Family Executive Director of the 21st Century China Center. I'm standing in today for Michael Davidson, who is really the expert in this field, but unfortunately he's out of town and cannot be with us today. So we're so happy to have Shiran here, all the way from Northern California, to talk about air pollution regulations in China and the incentives behind the regulation that shape China's environmental policies. Shiran Victoria Shen is very special. She's truly an interdisciplinary scholar who holds degrees in political science as well as in civil and environmental engineering. Right, it's a rare combination that you see from the political scientists actually. Her research explores the intersections of politics, public policy, environmental sciences, and engineering. Currently, he's the lead researcher for a new program on China's energy and climate issues at the Prefectural Institute for Energy, part of the Stanford's Dual School of Sustainability. She also holds a tenure track position at the University of Virginia, which I think she has deferred for a year or more. Love to hear that afterwards. Shiran just published her first book. I have a copy here. And actually with the Cambridge University Press, entitled The Political Regulation Wave, the concept, a case of how local incentives systematically shape air quality in China. Now the paperwork, I was told, just came up today, so congratulations. And it is based on, the book is based on an award-winning dissertation from the Stanford Political Science Department. Am I on? Okay. And it won both the American Political Science Association's Harold Laswell Award and the PhD Dissertation Award from the Association for Public Policy Analysis and Management. So congratulations again. The talk is based on the research that's gone into the dissertation as well as into this book. The talk will last for about 35 minutes, followed by Q&A from this audience as well as from online. So please feel free, for those people who are on Zoom who can hear me, right? Feel free to type your questions to the Q&A box, and I will ask them on your behalf afterwards. Finally, I would like to mention that the talk is being recorded. We will reserve the decision about whether to post this online, depending on the quality and some other considerations, but you will hear about them if we do. So without further ado, let's invite Shiran to give a talk. Congratulations again on your book. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. And I am very excited to be here, coming from San Francisco to give a talk about my new-ish book, The Political Regulation Wave, a case of how local incentives systematically shape air quality in China. So I've been told that this is not strictly an academic talk, but one that introduces our general audience to the subject matter and also the main findings of the book. So I prepared the slides with that in mind. So I will begin with a bit of background about how I got interested in studying the politics of air pollution and why I decided to write this book. When I was living in Beijing in 2007, the city government was testing the effectiveness of various air pollution measures in anticipation of the Summer Olympics the following year. Determined to make the Summer Games the most successful and memorable of all time, the Beijing government invested a then record high 40 billion USD, of which 17 billion USD were poured into controlling air pollution. So I remember witnessing firsthand how political will and power were able to change the color of the sky in just a matter of days. In a mighty wave of air pollution regulation, dirty cars were banned from the streets. Privately owned cars were operating on the road based on an odd and even license plate number system. Dirty factories were shut down. Power plants were operating at substantially lower level, and construction projects were halted. since air pollution happens concomitantly with economic activities and environmental regulation has a direct and immediate impact on air quality, I remember seeing the skyline transforming from being shrouded in brownish yellow haze to having a crystal clear blue sky in just a few days. And this experience witnessing the Olympic blue got me really interested in studying the intersection of environmental science and also political science. So I majored in those subjects while an undergraduate at Swarthmore College. And then I moved on to Stanford University for graduate school, which felt very much like a continuation of the liberal arts experience, or so I made it to be. To better understand the causes and solutions for air pollution, I enrolled in a number of courses in science and engineering, which eventually led to a master's degree in civil and environmental engineering. And I was just telling the student from the China block at UCSD about like this little background story that when I first applied to the NEE CE program, I was turned down because they were skeptical. Can someone from political science be able to do, civil and environmental engineering? So I basically took 2 years of coursework and I did all of the course requirements, all of the degree requirements, and then they admitted me and I graduated at the same time. So that was a little backstory. I was just encouraging the UCSD students and students elsewhere to believe in yourself, right? So pursue interdisciplinary research, and you will be surprised of the findings. So my understanding of the political incentive for local regulatory ways was largely shaped by my personal experience witnessing the Olympic blue, and also from reading literature on how these top-down implementation campaigns can have an impact on policy outcomes. So in the graph here, you can see that the x-axis shows time and the y-axis shows regulation. So when there's more regulation, usually there are fewer air pollutants, so you will see bluer sky. Conventional wisdom holds that the ad hoc implementation campaigns call for special and occasional bureaucratic regulatory activities, and we're likely to see in the realm of air pollution regulation is the Olympic blue, the APEC blue, and also the military parade blue. However, my understanding began to change. In one GIS class, I acquired the technical skills to obtain annual average subnational level PM 2.5 concentration. So PM 2.5 refers to particulate matter whose diameter is smaller than 2.5 micrometers. It's even smaller than 1/30th of a normal human hair. And we living in the coastal Pacific coast, where we are not strangers to PM 2.5 pollution because of wildfire. So we can see in the map here, the yellow regions are the dirtiest. We know that the eastern part of China has terrible air quality. The light blue regions has cleanest air quality. We know that Tibet, the air is fresh in Tibet. And the red regions are somewhere in between the blue regions and the yellow regions in terms of air quality. And roughly around the same time, I took comparative politics seminars where I read about the impacts of local political cycles on policy outcomes. Specifically, I was very fascinated by the political business cycle phenomena, which refers to a phenomena usually in democracies where incumbents try to get reelected. And in order to do that, they try to project economic competency around the time of the election to curry favor with voters. And that is usually followed by economic contraction after the elections. So I had this epiphany. Can local political cycles have an impact on air quality? I thought that would be a promising direction to explore. So with the help of RAs, I compiled a data set on the characteristics of top political leaders at the prefectural level. I merged that data set with another data set on annual average PM 2.5 at the prefecture level and ran a regression. So here's what I found. I found gradual increase in PM 2.5 concentration after controlling for macro trends and the impact of top-down implementation campaigns. And when a new leader came in, there would be a reset in the initial level of PM 2.5 concentration. And I call this pattern a political pollution wave. Some of you in the audience may have seen earlier iterations of my work where I called it a political pollution cycle. I changed cycle to wave thanks to the helpful suggestions from the late political scientist Matthew McCubbins, who suggested that a cycle implies completeness, so imagine a circle, but a wave does not. So a wave better captures the phenomena here, which will become clearer as we proceed. So with that set of results, I headed into the field, and during one memorable interview at a local Environmental Protection Bureau, EPB for short, hereafter, some staff told me that they would do more environmental work early on in a party secretary's tenure for two reasons. The first reason is that they would anticipate the locality to prioritize other goals, specifically social stability and economic growth later on in a party secretary's tenure. And another reason is because when the predecessor, the previous party secretary left office, there's usually a very high level of pollution. So they want to be able to claim that, if we reduce, say, like PM 2.5 by 10 micrometers per 10 microgram per cubic meter, then it's like a 40% reduction compared to the prior year. As opposed to doing it later in the year where you reduce the exact same amount of absolute, the same absolute amount of air pollution, but it's a smaller percentage in reduction, right? So you want to claim that larger percentage reduction and then check the box off your list. So you have completed this environmental work. So that's why they prioritize environmental work early on in the party secretary's tenure. That happened even before environmental protection became important, and even when they were short of staff, meaning that they had a relatively low level of capacity to regulate. Later on in the party secretary's tenure, as said before, other goals would be prioritized, specifically stability and growth for a very, very long time in history. So the EPB would do less environmental work as a result. Sometimes they will receive phone calls from the party secretary's office ordering laxer regulation at large firms that hire predominantly male workers. The rationale is that if EPE goes in to regulate those highly polluting firms, then they might have to halt their operation, and then the firm might need to lay off workers, at least temporarily, and those workers can go on protest and cause disturbance to social stability at a time that's critical for the party secretary's career because he or she is being evaluated for promotion by their superior, which would be the provincial party secretary. So, and this phenomenon in the literature is known as regulatory forbearance. So as the staff at EPB was talking, she had that look on her face like, this is also standard and why I even asked. And I found her remarks to be very refreshing because so much of the environmental politics literature about China, really emphasize the static nature of implementation over time and the lack of capacity as the culprit for poor environmental policy implementation. So those are the two aspects I want to elaborate on further. The first is the relationship between capacity and implementation. So a large part of the works, the vast majority of works in Chinese politics, blame poor policy implementation to something known as selective policy implementation. It refers to the phenomena where local officials would try to target their limited resources to implement policies that are more critical for their careers. And for a long time, that was economic growth. And in doing that, they would sideline other policies that are deemed to be less important, and for a long time, that was environmental protection. So that would explain, so the constrained non-compliance is led to selective policy implementation and poor environmental policy outcomes. That's basically the vast majority of literature in Chinese politics. The political pollution wave phenomena, in contrast, indicates a situation where the prefectural party secretary would order laxer regulation, even when there was enough capacity to regulate. And such non-compliance is intentional and revocable. And this phenomena in the literature is known as forbearance. So the takeaway message here is capacity does not necessarily lead to implementation. The second point I want to elaborate on further is the notion of static implementation over time. So you see the x-axis here shows a given tenure for party secretary, years in office, and the y-axis indicates the level of implementation of state policies. A series of China scholars argue that when it comes to economic policy implementation, they're being implemented at a maximal or near maximal level. And on the other hand, policies are deemed to be less important, such as grain procurement and environmental policy for a long time in history, were implemented at a minimal or near minimal level. In other words, local implementers do just enough not to attract negative attention from upper levels. The phenomena of the political pollution wave indicates something different. So it indicates a gradual dial down in implementation. And this has important implications for scholars, because if scholars are looking at statistics early on in a tenure, they're likely to overestimate the average level of implementation. Conversely, if scholars are looking at statistics later on in a tenure, they're likely to underestimate the average level of implementation. So the takeaway message here is that implementation over time is not necessarily static, even after taking into account the impacts of top-down implementation campaigns. More broadly, I gained a new understanding of the local pollution regulation patterns. What I found is very different from extant literature, which emphasizes that these spurts in implementation are caused by ad hoc top-down implementations. Instead, what I found was that local political incentives are able to engender systematic, sustained, and habitual patterns in implementation. So now I introduce you to the theory of the political regulation wave. It is meant to be a general theory, not specific to China, not specific to air pollution regulation, with three scope conditions. First, in a decentralized political system, local leaders in autocracies or politicians in democracies have considerable power over decision-making and the allocation of resources. When the bureaucracy is not entirely insulated from political influence, these aspiring politicians or leaders are able to integrate their own career incentives into the bureaucratic implementation process. Second, aspiring leaders or politicians harbor incentives to prioritize different policies at different times while in office. And an example of this is the political business cycle phenomena mentioned earlier in the presentation. Thirdly, public administration literature suggests that when the implementation of a policy involves a high level of conflict and a low level of ambiguity, its implementation is political in nature, and the success or lack thereof depends on power dynamics. An example of a high conflict, low ambiguity policy in the United States is desegregation busing, which refers to the assignment and transportation of students from inside and outside of a school district in an effort to diversify the racial makeup at schools. The policy goal was unambiguous. It was to diversify the racial makeup of the school. The means to achieve that goal was also unambiguous, is to put students from inside and outside the school district onto the same bus. However, the policy attracted opposition from both white and Black populations, so it involved a high level of conflict. So under these three premises, political regulation waves are being engendered in systematic, habitual, and predictable ways. So the general testable implication of the theory is that when policy X is crucial for promotion or re-election, local leaders or politicians are incentivized to promote the implementation of X across their tenure in a pattern preferred by their superiors or voters, all else equal. When there's a preference for a gradual improvement in implementation, we're likely to see a gradual scale up in implementation. when there's a taste for regularized Weberian-like implementation, we're likely to observe a flat line. When there is an incentive to target implementation at a specific time, then we're likely to see either a spike or a dip in implementation. So, air pollution regulation in China provides an exciting testing ground for the theory of the political regulation wave. And in the next couple of slides, I will introduce you to the fit between the theories, scope conditions, and also air pollution regulation in China. So China has a highly decentralized local system where local officials possess a lot of power over decision-making and the allocation of resources. In stark contrast to a Weberian bureaucracy that is entirely insulated from political influence, Chinese bureaucracy has been under political control for a very long time in history. So here I use the example of the Prefectural EPB. So it's been under political control for a very long time. It is in the same vertical system. It is under the leadership of the provincial EPB. It's also under the leadership of the prefectural government. Since obtained most of its funding from the prefectural government, it answered to the policy prioritization of prefectural government, which for a very long time in history preferred growth and stability. So this study focuses on, and as I shall also mention, that this one agent to principal scenario. So some of the audience are GPS students, have taken public policy and political science courses. You've heard about this term, principal agent dilemma, which refers to a setting where the principal, who is like the boss, and also the agent, who is like the employee, have different incentives. So there would be a gap in implementation in what the principal wants and what actually gets implemented by the agent. So this phenomenon known in the literature is one agent, two principal scenario, continued well into the 13th five-year plan, which covered the period 2016 to 2020. And then there was a gradually verticalization of environmental management and rolled out across the country. So, and this study focuses on the the top leaders at the prefectural level for two interrelated reasons. First, prefectural leaders are in charge of all vital production elements, from labor policy to subsidies. In other words, they shape the extent and also the structure of the local economy. Second, local leaders, especially local governors, who are also known as mayors, are in charge of handing down annual reduction targets to county level authorities. And between the party secretary and the governor, the party secretary wields more de facto power over how much air pollution policy to implement. And this explains why an EPB staff told me the following. When the river runs slack, the public demands the Prefectural Environmental Protection Bureau chief to swim in the river. The one who should really go swim is the party secretary. Second, I will explain to you the incentives of strategizing aspiring leaders to prioritize different policies at different times in office. So under the nomenclatura, local personnel management system, each level appoints and evaluates officials at the immediately lower level. And local leaders in China typically want to get promoted because with promotion, there's more money, more power, higher social status, nicer cars, better houses, and all the other desirable things in life. These aspiring local leaders are incentivized to induce an implementation pattern throughout their tenure based on what their superiors want. What has not been written in existing literature, at least not in the English language literature, but appears crucial, is that in China, the evaluation system prizes gradual, 逐渐, and steady, 稳健 improvement in key policy areas. And this point has been reiterated in both official documents and field interviews. Now you might be wondering, why gradual improvement? So I believe there are two major reasons. First is that early years performance are in some way influenced by the actions of the predecessor near the time of leadership turnover. In contrast, later years performance is more reflective of the actual competency of the incumbent. And the second is a cultural factor. It's just in China, there is some preference for gradual improvement over time. So of course, this is a gradual improvement is a great strategy for aspiring local officials in China. It is not a great strategy for faculty members here, right? Because in our profession, there is path dependency. So it is quite important to put forward high quality work early on, establish reputation. Your life will be a little easier later on. So next, I will explain to you while reducing air pollution in China involves a high level of conflict, the level of ambiguity depends on the particular type of air pollutant being regulated. So, to get everyone in the audience on the same page, I'll give a quick overview of the components of air pollution. So air pollution refers to the presence of different types of air pollutants, such as sulfur dioxide gas, nitrogen dioxide gas, and total suspended particles, which is more scientifically known as particulate matter, or PM. Depending on the diameter of the PM, we have PM10, which refers to particulate matter whose diameter is smaller than 10 micrometers. And as a subset of PM10, we also have PM2.5, which refers to the particulate matter whose diameter is smaller than 2.5 micrometers. And this study focuses on the regulation of sulfur dioxide and PM2.5 because those were the two criteria air pollutant being regulated during different periods in China. So regulating sulfur dioxide and PM2.5 involved a high level of conflict because that over required a scaling back of production and also the installation and operation of pollution treatment facilities, which pitted against goals such as growth and revenue. And when you scale up production, you're likely to have to lay off some workers, and that could cause some disturbance to social stability. Regulating PM2.5 involved a low level of ambiguity. Sulfur dioxide mainly comes from the industrial sector, and effectively reducing sulfur dioxide involves the installation and operation of sulfur dioxide scrubbers, which is straightforward to do. The goal to reduce sulfur dioxide emissions was also an unambiguous one. Under both the 10th five-year plan and the 11th five-year plan, the goal was to reduce sulfur dioxide emissions by 10% based on the 2000 and the 2005 levels. However, the two five-year plans differed drastically in terms of the incentives being provided and also the quality and intensity of monitoring. Under the 10th five-year plan, sulfur dioxide reduction was not a binding target. Under the 11th five-year plan, it was a binding target tied to cadre evaluation in most provinces. Under the 10th five-year plan, sulfur dioxide emissions data were largely self-reported and were unverifiable or unverified. In contrast, under the 11th five-year plan, auditing and data verification programs were being operated by the Ministry of Environmental Protection. There was the installation of continuous emissions monitoring system, also known as SIEMS, at coal-fired power plants. And verification was also conducted based on data from satellite observations and air quality models. As the theory would predict, so I will quickly go over what the axes are. So the x-axis represents time, and the y-axis represents regulatory effectiveness. In the case of sulfur dioxide, because its regulation involves like installing and operating scrubbers, so the efforts to regulate would translate pretty easily into regulatory effectiveness. And the vertical line here indicates a turnover. So as the theory would predict, before sulfur dioxide became a criteria air pollutant, there was a gradual scale down in sulfur dioxide regulation, while the local officials were trying to prioritize other goals such as stability. And after sulfur dioxide reduction became the criteria air pollutant tied to the reduction targets were tied to cadre evaluation. So based on both satellite statistics and also the officially reported statistics, the regulation became much more regularized. So we see the lines becoming flatter over time, after 2005. And of course, these lines are drawn here to basically to give you like a visual representation of the results. The regression tables, you can find them in the book. So regulating PM 2.5 was a very different story. It involved quite a level of ambiguity. So the goal to reduce PM 2.5 was an unambiguous one. Under the first phase of the Clean Air Action Plan, which lasted from 2013 to 2017, reducing PM 2.5 pollution in 4 regional clusters by specified percentages by 2017 became mandatory, and binding targets in the cadre evaluation system. The 4 regional clusters were colored on this map, and I'm sorry, it's a little hard to see for the audience here. So basically the Jing-Jin-Ji area, Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei, and surrounding area, the Yangtze River Delta region, the Pearl River Delta region, which includes 10 prefectures in Guangdong province, and also Chongqing Prefecture. And during the same period, under the 12th five-year plan, which ran from 2011 to 2015, it became mandatory to monitor PM 2.5 concentrations in those 4 regional clusters. However, PM 2.5 is extremely wicked and shockingly precarious. It's extremely wicked because due to its small size, can travel deep into the lungs and trigger strokes and cause cancer. It is widely believed by public health officials to be the most dangerous type of air pollutant. PM 2.5 is also shockingly precarious. Efforts to uncover the full slate of precursors for PM 2.5 are still ongoing as of the time of this presentation. That led Premier Li Keqiang to announce at a State Council meeting in March 2017 that he will reward heavily anyone who could tackle the causes of smog. Specifically, he said this. I really like his quote, so I wrote it down. Now that everyone is already well fed and hopes to live well, that will require quality not only for eating and drinking, but also for breathing. I have expressed several times at the executive meetings of the State Council, if there is a research team that can thoroughly uncover the formation mechanism and the hazards of smog and put forward more effective countermeasures, we're willing to reward heavily from the Premier's reserve fund. This is a top priority for people's livelihood. We will not hesitate to spend money, and we must study the matter thoroughly. So the precariousness of PM 2.5 has a lot to do with complex chemical formation processes. Again, scientists are still discovering new precursors for PM 2.5. A 2020 PNAS study, so PNAS refers to Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. It is one of the top 3 general science journals. So it basically discovered that water vapor over here from combustion and desulfurization processes is a precursor for the formation of secondary aerosols. At a State Council meeting in September 2020, led by Premier Li Keqiang, the experts also discussed the role of the overuse of ammonia in treating NOx as a precursor for PM 2.5 formation. Because at the time, NOx wasn't known. NOx refers to a combination of nitrogen monoxide, NO, and nitrogen dioxide, NO2. So it's it's denoted here as NOx, NOx. So NOx was a known precursor for PM 2.5. So, but at the time, ammonia was not. So they used ammonia to treat NOx while inadvertently adding more to the precursor to form PM 2.5. And this might explain the severe haze in northeastern China in the early part of 2021, when the region was under COVID-19 lockdown. And then there was this strange severe haze going on. And that might just be the result of, these complex chemical formation processes. So as you can see, without full knowledge of the precursors of PM 2.5, some efforts to reduce PM 2.5 could inadvertently cause more PM 2.5 to be formed. So what I found based on empirical data, so I looked at both official statistics, that's basically the reporting from the monitors planted at different locations in those 4 regional clusters, and also the satellite-based statistics. I showed you the map of PM 2.5 earlier in the presentation. So I found that, very similar to the sulfur dioxide regulation case, there was a gradual dial down in regulation, which caused gradually more PM 2.5 concentration during a given tenure after controlling for the impact of top-down implementation campaigns and macro trends. And as the theory would also as we would also expect, because PM 2.5 regulation does not quite fit the third condition of the theory, scope condition of theory, which requires there to be a low level policy ambiguity. So the local pollution wave continued after 2013, after PM 2.5 became a criteria air pollutant in those 4 regional clusters. However, there is a little caveat here. So here I refer to the cities that are in those 4 regional clusters as treated cities, and the cities that are outside those 4 regional clusters as non-treated cities. So official reported statistics would indicate that the magnitude of the local pollution wave in those treated cities was on average smaller than the local pollution waves in non-treated cities. But the satellite statistics would indicate a different scenario here. So they would indicate that the average strength of the local pollution wave in both treated cities and non-treated cities were statistically indistinguishable. So now you might be wondering, what explains the continuation of a local pollution wave? So I believe it has quite a lot to do with the counterproductivity of some PM 2.5 treatment measures, as explained on the prior slide about the complex chemical formation processes for PM 2.5. A common way to treat pollution in China is to sprinkle water near exhaust ducts. And because it is very hot, the water evaporizes to form water vapor that is an enhancer of the formation of secondary aerosols. There could also be the overuse of ammonia, which was not known to be a precursor in treating NOx that basically caused more PM 2.5 to be formed. So those were the main empirical results. Now I will move on to the implications and potential contributions of the study. They come in 6 different categories: theoretical, empirical, normative, China studies, public policy, and cross-disciplinary studies. So there is a bit of something there for everybody. So I will first discuss the theoretical implications. So basically, the book introduces a new driver of local policy waves. It suggests that local incentives can engender actual changes in policy implementation over time in a systematic and predictable way. Second, the case of the regulation of PM 2.5 challenges the conventional wisdom that getting the incentives right and enhancing monitoring are early enough for a successful policy implementation. It shows that lowering the level of policy ambiguity is just as important. In the realm of air pollution regulation, that means understanding the specific characteristics of a specific air pollutant. And thirdly, the theory is meant to be a general one that's applicable to both autocracies and democracies under scope conditions. And already I found supported empirical evidence from air pollution regulation in Mexican municipalities. I'd be happy to talk more during Q&A. So the second one is a normative one. So the study suggests cases where even well-intentioned public policies can have unintended consequences. And they impose tremendous human costs and welfare losses. When the environment is being prioritized, it's great. That's great for public health, but then the growth might be slowed. There may be economic losses, and that could also exacerbate unemployment. On the other hand, when the economy is being prioritized, it's great. There's economic progress. There are more employment opportunities. That's good for social stability. But then we have deteriorated environmental quality that sickens and kills more people. These are difficult trade-offs for decision makers. And next, I will be talking about China studies. So the book makes the first comprehensive effort to highlight the systematic temporal patterns in the pursuit of multiple goals over time. It identifies the case where political superiors and subordinates share aligned preferences. And this is in stark contrast to the vast majority of works in Chinese politics, which argue that there's a misalignment of interests between the principal and the agent, and that explains why the central government cannot implement its policies effectively at the local level. But this study introduces a case where the preferences of the superior and subordinate are aligned. So it is not a principal-agent dilemma. And finally, I will highlight the cross-disciplinary aspects of the work. This is the first book grounded in political science that introduces knowledge and techniques from environmental sciences and engineering. It offers new approaches and directions for future interdisciplinary environmental research. And that is it. I thank you for your attention. I want to highlight the fact that the book has online open access now and forever. So you can use the link here, bit.ly/political regulation wave. That's the shortened URL, or you could also just Google the title of the book, get to its Cambridge core page, and download the entire book in one PDF for free. And the other thing is today is pub day for the paper version of the book. The paperback sells at $29.99. If you like reading on paper, you can order from your favorite online vendor, and the shipping happens immediately. And also, I have a Twitter handle. Haven't been very active there, but I'm trying to be more active. As Victoria Shen, that's the name of the handle. You can follow me on Twitter. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So Victoria, now you have done your talk. We want you to be seated there.
Okay.
Maybe we'll have a 15-20 minutes of conversation with this audience. So, and I'll also monitor the online if any questions come up. So right now it's actually we have about 15 minutes. Maybe I can ask the first question. I want to ask the Li Keqiang question. Actually, his statement caught my eye too, right? So he's offering a reward, right?
Yes.
And you have come up with an explanation.
Should I claim?
I think you should claim that reward. So, but my question though, that is, if you were to advise him, let's just say, hey, here's the problem, right? That the political calendar of this very career-minded officials, that drives the regulatory, laxation or stringentness, and that explains why, you have this temporal change about the pollutants, right? Now, let's say that's your finding, and from Beijing's perspective, how would you advise him to deal with that nutty problem? Right.
Okay.
So if you answer that question right, you could get the reward.
Okay. Okay. So I wrote about this towards the conclusion of the book. I think there are two major policy recommendations. One is the verticalization of the environmental management system. I think the reason that there is like an inconsistency within WAVE and across WAVE is due to the fact that local political leaders are able to integrate their own incentives into the bureaucratic implementation process. So if we insulate the activities of the bureaucracy a little bit more from these political influence, that's right, verticalization of the environmental management system, then we'll likely have more consistent policy implementation over time. Unfortunately, reforms are on the horizon. So I think it's September 2016, there was a central document being circulated about gradually roll out the verticalization of bureaucracy. So just use the prefectural EPB as an example. So the prefectural EPB would come under the direct management of the provincial environmental EPB, including getting their budgets. But the prefectural government would still play some role in the management, but to a much lesser extent than before. So that's a move in the right direction. And the second thing is basically, since PM 2.5 is very precarious, each locality has its own PM 2.5 source profile. So the second recommendation I would give is to have the policymakers and also the atmospheric modelers to work together to come up with strategies to basically control PM 2.5 in their locality.
So basically, you're advocating sort of cutting the tie between the local environmental regulators and the local political leadership. Right. I think she would like that because that will help him to centralize this particular line of authority as well.
Right.
Okay, good. Any questions? Yeah. Sure.
My name is Jun Hui, or Chris, second year MC semester of Chinese football I'm having a football fair students here. And I was just curious about some of the relations that I have when I was doing field research with the people of the sociology department of undergrad college in Shanghai. We visited a village in Jiangsu province near Suzhou, and the local officials, they have very strict environmental protection target that they have to meet. And they have to shut down one of the factories based in a small town of maybe 10 or 100,000 people or something. And the fact that the small town, we also interviewed the enterprise owner, the owner of these small factory. And he told us that he has been in that town for like 20 years, have paid fair share of their taxes, and have hired a lot of employees from many of whom are migrant workers from different parts of the country. And they have provided like a job opportunity for their kids so that the kids could grow up in these local areas. But then the small town officials, they plan to shut down that factory because it generates a lot of pollution to the river, the soil, many other aspects of their environment. So I was thinking there's a lot of this sort of cost, welfare costs or economic costs for their local economy, for their, many of the migrant workers they employ, and many of the things that they have done. And the reason is that because they built their business 20 years ago, they don't have like very complete credentials for environmental, how much pollution they have. But then at that time, no companies have that. So it's just kind of like a loophole in the system, and then try to shut down, which I understand because I've visited many villages over the years, and I came to realize that a lot of them are so much cleaner and so much better than before. But then at the same time, you can still see that there are some of the companies that were forced to shut down simply because they don't have the sort of materials that they need to have. So I'm thinking, what's your take on these sort of dynamics and tensions or dynamics in this kind of processes? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. It's kind of given a few pages in the book, these are very difficult trade-offs. It's like on the one hand, we try to achieve a certain goal, but then it comes in contradiction with other goals. And so at a certain point in time, you want to prioritize one and sacrifice the other. And these are just very, very difficult trade-offs. And I think a good direction the country is heading in is basically bringing its industry. It's basically implementing the amazing clean technologies to try to reduce the trade-off between the economy and the environment. So that will help us reduce the amount of basically social costs when it comes to cleaning the environment.
Thank you.
In the back.
Kind of jumping off of that, it seems like there are also some businesses and industries that would benefit from more consistent and more predictable regulation because I know some people who, I mean, definitely know more about this than I do, but some people who studied like China's environmental regulation point out that sometimes factories are asked to shut down tomorrow because they need to get polluted or whatever. And that's extreme, but still. So who are some of the natural allies who, in addition to the government, and the rest of society might want some of these changes?
Add a small bit of thing comment to that.
Sure.
I know some of the companies that my friends uncles own. They used to be a mining company and they transformed to be a horticultural company. So because local government don't want more mining in their town. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, so there's a little bit of distance between us, and because of face mask, I missed the last part of your question.
What are some of the natural allies
Yes.
for that in the locality that will want more consistent environmental regulation? Because they don't want to face this unpredictable future that their mines might be shut down the next day. Right? Is that the gist of your question?
Exactly, because with environmental regulation, with environmental regulation, sometimes it's hardest on businesses if they have no idea what will happen, or if they're asked to make very sudden changes as opposed to consistent ones. So yeah, who might be outside of government be interested in these reforms?
Which is so the first thing coming to my mind is the people who work at those factories, the people who work at those firms, and some of them are local, some of them are, as you suggested, migrants from other regions. I mean, they would be the direct beneficiary of more regularized regulation.
In other words, let me just follow up quickly. Your theory that put the local political leader at the right of the center, right? And it's someone who responds to this tenure cycle, right? But does this leader also respond to the local pressure groups, like as you know that question indicates, like the businesses and I mean, is the local leader that autonomous that they just only care about that tenure? They don't have to worry about their constituents at all, like people,
Right.
SOEs and miners and all this. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a very popular question for this project. It's like every time I present it, I get this question. It's like, but you haven't talked about the people who actually care about the welfare of their locality. So in terms of the statistical analysis aspect, the fact that there are people in the data set, you know, who actually care about the well-being of their localities, who are more interested in implementing pretty regular regulation over time. But then you see like a statistical pattern that would indicate that if we subtract the people who are interested in consistent implementation, then we are probably going to see a steeper slope, right? So even more severe pollution wave among the people who among the aspiring local officials who are not too tied to their localities.
Jonathan, sorry, then you.
Thanks. In 2008, I think that the EPB changed to being a ministry, and then 2018 to being a super minister or something like that. How it's affected your research?
So this research basically looked at two different time periods, 2001 to 2017. So that was the period where during which sulfur dioxide was being regulated and PM2.5 was later being regulated. And afterwards, so I think it's more centralization of the environmental management system. And one particular activity that's become more popularized is the sending central environmental inspection teams to the localities, and usually they don't announce that they're coming until they're about to do it. So a working paper I have with my co-authors basically looks at the how the central environmental inspections would influence the relative environmental compliance between dominant and non-dominant firms. Dominant firms refers to firms that basically hire the most workers, contribute the most revenues to the locality. Usually they behave worse. It's because of that bargaining power they have with the environmental regulatory authority locally. They usually commit more violations and they're also being punished less. But however, so based on our data, we found that during these inspection campaigns, basically they were more like the non-dominant firms. They were not committing more violations. They were being punished just as much as the other firms. So a question that remains is how much can the effect last, right? Right. So in our study, so we found that basically this effect basically continued even after the central environmental inspections concluded, and we figured that it's because these types of inspections are becoming more common. So they were just afraid that there could be a new wave of inspection from the center. So they so we see that dominant firms, non-dominant firms behaving more like each other.
Could you identify yourself? Yeah.
Sure, yeah, I'm Zhenghua, I'm a first year PhD student at MAE. Yeah, Shiran, thanks for the talk. So my take on the political pollution wave is maybe we need to have higher turnover rates, maybe like 45 days, but that's a side story. So my question is, when I was working on air pollution quantification in Shanghai, I remember the metrics usually government officials care about is usually like some rolling averages of AQI or amount of days where AQI is above or below a certain threshold. So I'm wondering if this kind of choice of metrics would affect the slopes of the curves on that wave graph, or what could contribute to the slopes of different tenures, for example, this kind of uncertainties.
Okay, so the uncertainties, so I basically, the slope is basically contributed by how much like changes in regulation. So there are two major pathways to pollution. One is economic activities, the other is regulation. So my study found that it's really the changes in regulatory activities that contribute to variation in a pollution levels. It's not, the variation is not so much explained by the economy, but it's more explained by the regulatory activities. So that's the main source of those changes. But I think you asked like a really interesting question. Is like, it's like you have, on the one hand, you have these official statistics, and on the other hand, you have these satellite-based statistics which would be more, possibly more objective of the reality. But then I decided to basically run analysis based on both statistics because they provide different types of information. The official statistics would be what do the officials want their superiors to know. And the other set of satellite-based statistics, they're possibly more objective of what's actually happening. And you also reminded me of like a different paper, which is actually by a former UCSD faculty member. So he was basically like effortless perfection. I think that was the title of the paper. Yes. So he was basically finding that there was some manipulation of so blue sky days, the reporting of blue sky days at the margin. It would be more misreporting when it's more concealable. I think that was a very interesting paper, and the difference between his work and my work is that he focuses more on the manipulation of the official statistics, while my study looks at the actual air pollution. Right.
Yes.